Jordan Scott stood at the center of a revolution. In the modern age of social justice movements, few names had become as synonymous with the fight for racial equality as theirs. A charismatic and passionate advocate for the Black Lives Matter (BLM) movement, Jordan had built a reputation as one of the most powerful voices in the call for racial justice. Whether through impassioned speeches that rallied crowds at protests or viral social media posts that ignited conversations across the globe, Jordan's influence was undeniable. It all began when Jordan, a university graduate from a modest background, entered the world of activism during their college years. They were initially a member of smaller, local social movements, but quickly rose to prominence due to their ability to connect with people, especially younger generations who felt disillusioned by the system. Jordan's voice carried an authenticity that others lacked. It was a blend of personal experience and raw emotion that resonated with so many. Graduating with a degree in sociology, Jordan could have easily chosen a conventional career path, but their passion for social justice led them to a different journey. They began organizing protests, speaking at rallies, and using their social media platforms to amplify marginalized voices. Their message was simple yet powerful. The fight for racial equality was not just necessary, it was urgent. They had seen firsthand the toll of systemic racism, from police brutality to the lack of economic opportunity in disenfranchised communities, and it ignited a fire in them to demand change. As their name grew more recognized, so did their platform. What began as small, grassroots protests eventually became major national events, often attracting the attention of global media outlets. Jordan became a fixture on news channels, interviewed by reporters who wanted to hear from the most vocal advocate of BLM. They spoke on college campuses, in front of large crowds, and even appeared on talk shows, reaching millions of viewers with each appearance. They had become a symbol of activism, an embodiment of the generation's determination to fight for justice. Social media only amplified Jordan's reach. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became their battleground for spreading messages of hope and resistance. Every post, every tweet, became a rallying cry for their followers, thousands of whom shared and amplified Jordan's words. Hashtags like #JusticeForAll and #EndPoliceBrutality spread like wildfire, often trending worldwide as Jordan's voice rang through the digital space, reminding the world that racial justice was not a topic for debate, it was a necessity for survival. But it wasn't just about the big moments. Behind the scenes, Jordan worked tirelessly with grassroots organizations, mentoring young activists, helping them understand the complexities of social justice work, and empowering them to make change in their own communities. They were not just a figurehead. Jordan was an architect of the movement, shaping its direction and future. Jordan Scott was no longer just an activist, they were a cultural force, a beacon of hope for those who had long been silenced. Their influence stretched far beyond the streets and social media, and as their fame grew, so did the weight of their message. But as with all stories of rising stars, Jordan was about to face a moment of reckoning, one that would challenge everything they had built. It was a quiet afternoon when the storm hit. Jordan Scott, the powerful voice behind the Black Lives Matter (BLM) movement, was preparing for a keynote speech in Chicago. Their public relations team was finalizing the event details when Jordan saw a trending hashtag, #JordanExposed. Initially unfazed, Jordan clicked the link, unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold. A rival activist group had uncovered a series of old tweets from Jordan's college years, long buried in the archives of their social media accounts. These tweets, dating back nearly a decade, were filled with racist slurs and derogatory remarks aimed at various racial groups. Jordan had made inappropriate jokes and disparaging comments about Black and Asian people, language that now seemed unimaginable coming from the outspoken BLM advocate they had become. The tweets quickly spread across social media, causing an immediate uproar. Within hours, Jordan's name was trending, not as a champion for racial justice, but as a symbol of hypocrisy. The backlash was swift and brutal. How could Jordan, a vocal advocate for racial equality, have said these things, was the question on everyone's lips. The very people who had once rallied behind Jordan now felt betrayed, questioning the integrity of everything Jordan had fought for. The media quickly seized on the story. News outlets, commentators, and social media influencers dissected the scandal, casting doubt on Jordan's authenticity. Journalists questioned whether someone who had expressed such hateful views in the past could truly be committed to fighting for racial justice. The narrative was clear: Jordan's words contradicted everything they now stood for. At first, Jordan denied the accusations. They claimed the tweets were taken out of context, arguing that they were a product of youthful ignorance. "I was young. I didn't understand the power of my words," Jordan stated in a public response. But the more they denied it, the more the public saw it as an attempt to cover up the truth. The damage was already done, and no amount of explanation seemed to lessen the impact. Jordan's public relations team scrambled to contain the fallout, but the scandal continued to spiral. The online persona Jordan had built over years of activism was now being overshadowed by these offensive, outdated comments. Each new revelation felt like another crack in the foundation of their career, and Jordan began to question whether their past would forever overshadow their future. As the media storm intensified, Jordan found themselves facing the harsh reality that their past actions could never be fully erased. The same social media platforms that had propelled their activism now became the vehicle for their downfall. The scandal spread across Twitter, Instagram, and news sites, with every retweet and comment fueling the fire. The section ends with a live broadcast where a reporter asks Jordan, "Do you still stand by these tweets? Or are they a reflection of a person you no longer recognize?" The question lingers in the air, and with it, the first seeds of doubt are planted, not just in the minds of Jordan's supporters, but in Jordan's own heart. The past, once forgotten, had come back to haunt them. The backlash from the scandal hit Jordan Scott like a tidal wave, but their first instinct was to fight back. The tweets were old, they argued. Made during their college years, when they were still figuring out the world and their place in it. "I was just a kid back then," Jordan insisted in their first public statement, trying to distance themselves from the offensive comments. "They were jokes, not meant to be taken seriously. I've grown since then." But as the hours ticked by, Jordan's defense only seemed to worsen their predicament. The more they insisted that the tweets didn't represent who they were now, the more the public began to see them as someone who had failed to confront the deep-rooted issues in their past. Their public relations team, already scrambling to contain the damage, pushed Jordan to address the scandal head-on. They suggested a carefully worded apology, one that acknowledged the harm caused and demonstrated regret for their past actions. But Jordan rejected the idea outright. "I don't need to apologize for something that doesn't define me," they snapped, frustration boiling under the surface. "These people are trying to tear me down, to use my past to invalidate the work I've done. It's not fair." Yet, the more Jordan fought to defend themselves, the more the public saw a person who was unwilling to take responsibility. Their attempts to deflect blame only made the situation worse. Supporters who had once viewed Jordan as an unwavering symbol of integrity now began to question their authenticity. The hashtag Jordan Exposed became a rallying cry for critics, and the debate about whether Jordan could truly advocate for racial justice while harboring such views in the past seemed to dominate every conversation. Jordan felt betrayed, not just by the people who were now attacking them, but by the very system they had worked so hard to dismantle. "Why should I have to defend myself like this?" they thought angrily. "My past is being weaponized to discredit everything I've done for the cause. They don't care about my growth, they only care about tearing me down." The anger festered, both in their heart and on social media. Every tweet defending themselves seemed to escalate the storm, fueling the fire of the controversy rather than extinguishing it. Meanwhile, those closest to Jordan were divided in their reactions. Some friends and colleagues advised them to face the situation with humility, to acknowledge their past mistakes and show true growth. "People will respect you more if you own it," one mentor suggested. "You can't change the past, but you can control how you respond now." Others, however, encouraged Jordan to double down, to reject the notion of apologizing for something they didn't believe in anymore. "The system wants you to apologize," a fellow activist argued. "But you've done nothing wrong. Don't let them make you feel guilty for things that happened years ago." Jordan's frustration grew as they realized that no matter what they said, they couldn't seem to control the narrative. Every statement, every interview, felt like it added more fuel to the fire. The very people who had once stood by them now seemed to question their sincerity. It wasn't just the media and the critics anymore, it was their supporters, too. The seeds of doubt that had been planted were growing rapidly, and Jordan was struggling to find a way to stop the storm. In the end, Jordan was left torn between two choices: double down on their defiance or confront the mistakes of their past with the humility and accountability the situation demanded. Both options felt like surrender, and neither seemed to promise a clear path forward. As the days passed, the intensity of the backlash only grew. Every headline, every social media post, felt like an assault on Jordan Scott's identity. The once clear path of their activism had become a tangled web of guilt and confusion. No matter how many times they denied the racist tweets, no matter how fiercely they defended their current beliefs, something inside them began to shift. They couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Late at night, when the noise of the world faded into the background, Jordan found themselves alone with their thoughts. The tweets from their college days had been careless, ignorant, and deeply hurtful. The more they thought about it, the more they realized that those words, those jokes, were not just a product of youthful foolishness. They were a reflection of a mindset shaped by privilege, lack of awareness, and unexamined biases. Jordan had been a product of the same system they now fought so hard to dismantle. In the solitude of their reflection, Jordan couldn't escape the mounting guilt. They saw images of young people who had once admired them, who had marched with them, who had believed in the very cause they championed. How could they look those people in the eyes now, knowing that their past actions contradicted the very ideals they had preached? Jordan's once strong belief in their own righteousness now felt fragile, vulnerable to the weight of their past mistakes. The internal conflict was suffocating. How could they continue to be a voice for change when they had once been complicit in perpetuating harmful views? How could they speak out against injustice when they had once been blind to their own prejudices? The realization hit like a wave: their activism, the platform they had built, had to be rooted in something deeper than words alone. It had to be grounded in true self-awareness and accountability. For days, Jordan wrestled with the decision to confront their past. It wasn't just about making an apology, it was about something more profound: the willingness to change, to truly evolve, and to own up to the harm they had caused. Personal growth was never easy, but Jordan had come to understand that accountability was the only way forward. If they wanted to be a genuine advocate for social justice, they had to be willing to admit their own flaws and mistakes. Finally, Jordan made the decision. They composed a statement, one that came not from a place of defensiveness, but from genuine remorse. "I cannot change the hurtful words I once said," Jordan wrote, their fingers trembling as they typed. "I cannot undo the damage I caused. But I can acknowledge that these words were a reflection of ignorance, and I regret them deeply. I have grown since then. I am committed to learning, unlearning, and doing better, not just for myself, but for the cause I believe in." It was a vulnerable moment, one that felt like stepping into the unknown. The apology was not just an attempt to salvage their reputation, it was an attempt to heal. Jordan understood that this was only the beginning of a much longer journey. Redemption wasn't something that could be achieved overnight, but it had to start somewhere. By owning their mistakes, by confronting the truth of who they had been, they were opening the door to true transformation, not just for themselves, but for the movement they represented. As Jordan hit send on the statement, they felt a sense of weight lift from their shoulders. The path forward was unclear, but for the first time in days, they felt ready to face it. The journey toward redemption had begun. The apology that Jordan Scott had released was a turning point, but it did not come without consequence. Almost immediately, the response from the public was a mixed bag, an unpredictable storm of praise and criticism that felt impossible to navigate. On one side, there were those who applauded Jordan for their courage. Many longtime supporters expressed admiration for Jordan's honesty, appreciating the fact that they had owned up to their past mistakes. "This is what true growth looks like," one supporter tweeted. "Jordan doesn't shy away from the past, and that's why they're still a leader in this fight for justice." To these supporters, Jordan's apology was a sign of strength. It showed that they had the integrity to not just fight for racial equality in the public sphere but also to reckon with their own role in perpetuating harmful ideas. However, on the other side of the debate, a large group of former fans and activists felt betrayed. "You can't be a champion for Black lives when you've once dismissed Black people as a joke," one critic wrote. Others argued that Jordan's past was irreparable and that their apology was nothing more than a public relations move to salvage their reputation. For these individuals, Jordan's past words were too damaging, too indicative of a character flaw that couldn't be erased by a few carefully chosen sentences. The debate raged on social media, creating a deep divide that Jordan hadn't anticipated. As the backlash continued, Jordan found themselves confronting an uncomfortable reality: the public's need for moral purity was unyielding. Many of those who had once stood with Jordan began to turn their backs, seemingly unwilling to forgive even a glimpse of imperfection. It was a harsh reminder of how quickly public figures could be discarded when they were no longer seen as untouchable icons of virtue. This was especially evident among a group of prominent public figures who had once supported Jordan's activism. Now, with the scandal swirling, many seemed eager to distance themselves. Some even saw the situation as an opportunity to present themselves as morally superior. They issued statements calling for more accountability, their tone perhaps more about gaining social capital than promoting real change. Jordan felt torn. Was their work in the movement still valid, or had their past completely invalidated everything they had built? They had been an ardent advocate for justice, and the last thing they wanted was to step aside for fear of being seen as a hypocrite. But the weight of the backlash made them question everything: their own guilt, the potential for real change, and their place within the movement. As Jordan grappled with these questions, the internal struggle became unbearable. Was it better to step down and let a cleaner figure take the lead? Or should they continue their work, knowing that they would be constantly judged for their past? The guilt was palpable, yet their passion for justice remained unwavering. They realized that their journey of growth, painful as it was, had only just begun. After much reflection, Jordan made the difficult decision to remain in the movement. But this time, they vowed to approach it with a renewed sense of self-awareness and accountability. They were no longer just a voice in the crowd, they would work toward becoming the kind of activist who could lead with humility and sincerity. Jordan didn't have all the answers, but they knew this much: their work wasn't over. There was much to be done, not just for racial equality but for their own journey of personal redemption. And that, Jordan realized, was the true work of activism: not perfection, but the courage to evolve and make meaningful change. The months that followed were some of the most challenging and transformative of Jordan Scott's life. The damage from the past could not be erased, but Jordan was determined to rebuild, to demonstrate that growth was not just a personal journey, but a communal one. They understood now that being a true activist wasn't just about the battles fought on the streets or the social media posts made in the heat of the moment. It was also about the work that happened within, the humility required to acknowledge past mistakes, and the effort to build trust once it had been broken. Jordan knew that repairing their image would take more than words, it would take actions. To that end, they immersed themselves in community outreach, seeking to make amends through tangible, consistent efforts. They started by focusing on the next generation of activists, spending time in schools and local organizations to engage with young people who were just beginning to understand the importance of social justice. Jordan's new approach was deeply grounded in accountability. They spoke openly with these young activists, not just about the need for systemic change, but also about the personal responsibility each person carried in the movement. "We can't expect the world to change if we aren't willing to change ourselves," Jordan would say in talks, sharing their own experiences with racial injustice and the struggles they faced reconciling their past actions with their current ideals. This transparency wasn't just about teaching the next generation how to fight for justice, it was also about teaching them how to face their own mistakes with humility. But the journey wasn't easy. Not everyone was ready to forgive, and many within the activist community remained wary. Still, Jordan persisted, working alongside grassroots organizations that focused on mentorship and education. They helped facilitate workshops on self-reflection and personal accountability for both seasoned activists and newcomers, encouraging an environment where growth was seen as a continual process rather than a destination. Through these efforts, Jordan began to slowly earn back the trust they had lost, one step at a time. Despite the obstacles, Jordan found solace in the belief that they were finally moving in the right direction, one that didn't require perfection, but rather a willingness to be better than they were yesterday. Healing, they realized, was not a linear journey. There would be setbacks, doubts, and moments of frustration. But as long as they stayed committed to their personal evolution, they could continue to contribute meaningfully to the movement. The story culminated at a major BLM protest in Washington, D.C. It was one of the largest demonstrations Jordan had ever been part of, and this time, they took the stage with a new sense of humility and wisdom. The crowd cheered as Jordan walked up to the podium, but their words carried a weight that was different from before. Gone were the lofty speeches about unwavering strength. Instead, Jordan spoke with an honesty that resonated deeply with the crowd. "I've made mistakes," they began. "I've been part of a system that I now see was flawed, and I've hurt people in ways I never intended. But I am committed to doing better. I am committed to listening, to learning, and to growing with all of you." This time, when Jordan spoke, it wasn't just about the cause, it was about their own journey as a person. The crowd listened intently, and as the last words echoed through the air, there was a renewed sense of purpose in their message. Jordan's commitment to the BLM movement had not wavered, but now, they understood more deeply the complexity of the fight, not just for justice in the world, but for justice within oneself. Jordan had finally come full circle. Their activism was no longer about presenting an image of perfection, but about embracing the messy, painful, yet beautiful process of growth. The work was far from over, but Jordan was ready for the long road ahead, armed with newfound clarity and a commitment to make lasting, meaningful change.